Madam Chairman, distinguished members of the committee, ladies and gentlemen, in recent decades, the United States of America has been the unquestioned global leader in terms of military strength, economic might, international finance, and in terms of cultural influence. American music and movies are enjoyed around the world, while American products such as Apple and Tesla are seen as models of innovation and creativity. And companies such as Amazon and Facebook have changed the global norms in which the social networks and markets form, thrive, and influence the future. Technological innovation and creativity have been the backbone and essence of American influence in the world, and such is ultimately rooted in the creation, marketing, and protection of ideas. However, at this moment, the United States stands at a defining moment in its history in which a single issue will greatly determine its future. And how policymakers react to that issue will greatly determine whether or not American leadership in the world will diminish or endure. I am speaking about American intellectual property, and the threat that we are trying to confront this day is international intellectual property theft. In a world where even domestic markets within the United States are increasingly shaped by globalizing trends, local companies are seeking to remain competitive. Local companies, by seeking to remain competitive, are looking more and more to foreign markets to meet the needs of their supply chains, as well as looking to foreign markets to fill those supply chains with American products. American multinational corporations are often outsourcing labor to cheaper foreign market are often outsourcing labor to cheaper foreign labor markets, while at the same time relying on foreign markets to meet their supply chains. Sometimes American companies are even faced with the choice of handing over their intellectual property to foreign entities or be excluded from that foreign market. Such creates a situation in which American-based companies are putting together finished products in which intimate knowledge of the components of those products span numerous nations and individuals whose loyalty and allegiance do not reside with the United States of America. This is creating a situation in which globalizing trends are exposing American intellectual property to increased vulnerability to theft by foreign entities, and in which the very essence of American innovation and creativity, which have enabled American leadership around the world in recent decades, are being threatened. For starters, it is extremely important for me to differentiate between domestic legal measures to ensure intellectual property security among American companies within the geographical boundaries of the United States, with that of the security of American intellectual property among foreign actors and entities. Within the United States, reasonably efficient judicial means exist to ensure the security of patents, trademarks, and copyrights. This gives people effective legal means to ensure that their innovation and creativity can be given the means and the opportunity to thrive within competitive markets, and that the investments given to this innovation and creativity will enjoy ownership of those unique ideas, as well as the knowledge that clearly defined parameters of those ideas will be protected from infringement or theft. Such a strong judicial arena in which American companies operate is fertile ground for innovation and creativity, and has allowed U.S. companies and ideas to shape global norms. However, outside of the geographical boundaries of the United States does not occupy a right to enforce American judicial preferences and principles through force. Such would be an act of war against the sovereignty and integrity of other nations whose laws concerning intellectual property may differ from our own, or even whose preferences and interests may not be aligned with those of the United States. Some nations might even believe that theft of American intellectual property is a good and moral action needed to help developing nations bring people out of poverty or provide individuals with affordable medicine. For those states, we must work to help raise people out of poverty, help them get the basic necessities they need. And for other nations, their interests may be similar, and that the state may be seeking to give a better life to its people. However, on a more fundamental level, if we keep in mind that each nation within the international system is seeking to maximize its own relative power within the whole of the system, we are confronted by the fact that American interests regarding the protection of American intellectual property will never align with the interests of foreign nations regarding American intellectual property. It might be possible to find other nations cooperating with the United States of America for the sake of creating a world in which all nations abide by norms and practices which protect the integrity of intellectual property arising from within other nations. However, even within such an ideal scenario, this would only occur when those nations partnering with the United States in such an endeavor believe that it is in their best interest to do so. Before getting into the complex web of international legal measures already in place to ensure the global integrity of international property, we must understand the complexity of this issue on a more fundamental level. This is due to the fact that the essence of this complex web of existing international legal measures already in place to ensure the global integrity of international intellectual property are grounded in complex bureaucratic systems. The problem with complex bureaucratic systems is that they often rely on a narrative to guide instances of necessary interpretation, and the narrative could potentially be shaped by the highest bidder. This means that if a nation like China financially supports international organization Y with X amounts of renminbi, China is expecting a return on that investment. China will want the narrative of that international organization to reflect the investment China made in it. The employees of that organization will be aware of how their salaries are paid and grateful to China for giving them their jobs, and will make decisions and interpretations which reflect that reality. Every nation is out to achieve its own interests, and such is by no means an affront to liberal international relations theories, which see international organizations as effective means of resolving disputes among nations. I am by no means saying that international organizations are ineffective at creating a global atmosphere of security for intellectual property. I am merely saying that the potential effectiveness of international organizations to secure international legal norms and precedents concerning international intellectual property are conditioned by a foundation where nations are seeking to increase their own relative gains within the system. The value of an international organization is that it shapes the perspective of competing nation states. Instead of seeking to increase their relative gains on a literal bloody battlefield, they enable nations to increase those relative gains through international bureaucratic means. This gives the United States three options for promoting American interests concerning American intellectual property within the international system. The United States can work bilaterally and multilaterally with foreign partners to offer incentives to those foreign actors to secure the integrity of American intellectual property. We can also work bilaterally and multilaterally with foreign actors to let them know that failure to ensure the integrity of American intellectual property will come with consequences. Such could entail a multitude of tools that the United States has at our disposal, including sanctions. Overall, these two options entail letting all the members of the international community know that it is in their best interests to partner with the United States in creating a world where international intellectual property is protected. The third option at our disposal is to help secure the international bureaucratic mechanisms already in place. When we think about the World Intellectual Property Organization, one of the 15 special agencies within the United Nations, we realize that while today the bureaucratic integrity of this organization is beyond reproach, tomorrow may be another story. It could be that in the future, investment within that organization could come to affect its narrative, which is why the United States should try and think of ways to invest within this organization in order to ensure that competing narratives originating from foreign state actors will not erode America's interests or the integrity of the World Intellectual Property Organization. In order to begin to understand the complex web of international norms, mechanisms, treaties, and agreements that assist nations in establishing practices to protect intellectual property within the international arena, we must first understand the tremendous limitations that potential enforcement mechanisms face. Nations are first and foremost self-interested entities whose goals within the international system are built on the foundation of interest seeking. For those entities to enter into an agreement with other nations to establish global norms concerning international protection for intellectual property, they must be convinced that upholding said norms will serve their interests. We have the Berne Convention for the Protection of Literary and Artistic Works, created in 1886, the 1883 Paris Convention for the Protection of Industrial Property, the TRIPS Agreement, which is the agreement on trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights between members of the World Trade Organization, in which the WTO's dispute settlement body can arbitrate trade disputes between governments. In order for the complex web of international resolutions and treaties to have any tangible and practical application, the World Intellectual Property Organization was established to administer those treaties, and today WIPO administers 26 such treaties. Through the active agency of WIPO, the goal is to create a free and fair international system in which state actors can more easily compete and cooperate. However, one of the many weaknesses of WIPO is the fact that within the international system has its own international legal personality as a global actor, and thus it is vulnerable to decision making that can be subject to it is vulnerable to decision making that can be subject to interpretation based on collective influencing factors which could potentially include funding by state and non-state actors and preferences from within that organization's leadership. To sum things up, in 2013, Representative Tim Murphy from Pennsylvania, acting as chairman for the House Energy and Commerce Committee, Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigation, noted the connection between cyber espionage and intellectual property security when he said, "Cyber espionage has obvious implications for national security, foreign relations, and the American economy. The IP Commission, which Senator Slave Gordon represents today, recently published a report on the theft of intellectual property and estimated that it costs the U.S. economy over $300 billion a year, which translates to roughly 2.1 million lost jobs. To put this in perspective, the IP Commission found that the total cost of cyber theft was comparable to the amount of U.S. exports to Asia." General Keith Alexander, the director of the National Security Agency, called cybercrime and the resulting loss of our intellectual property and technology to our competitors the greatest transfer of wealth in history. The fact of the matter is that the United States economy is driven by innovation and security related to ideas created within the private sector. The fact of the matter is that the United States economy is driven by innovation and security related to ideas created within the private sector are an integral part of U.S. national security. The current success of American companies such as Apple, Amazon, Facebook, and Tesla are the result of implementing innovation and creative ideas through investment, and the security of American intellectual property is a vital component of why such companies are successful. Without security for American intellectual property, U.S. companies will no longer drive the U.S. economy toward excellence and will no longer shape global norms. Even worse, without security for American intellectual property, crisis of character could accrue within American companies, a situation in which a collective loss of drive toward creative ideas could leave many with the idea of, why be creative if foreign actors are only going to steal our ideas? Such a crisis alone could threaten the stability of U.S. economic success, and such would, in the truest sense, be a terrible threat to U.S. national security. With that, I close my opening remarks. Let us now turn our attention to questioning. Madam Chairman, let me reiterate the question you asked me. What role does U.S.-China relations play in seeking to understand the importance of protecting American intellectual property? This is a very important question, and the reason that I was asked to speak before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee was concerning the international dimension of intellectual property theft. The truth of the matter is that this is an international crime committed by both state and non-state actors within the international system all around the world. It is an international crime that is not limited to one state, nor is it an international crime that only affects one continent or even one section of various economies. Intellectual property is an extremely diverse set of human ideas that relate to economic productivity. It incorporates the language of a book, the artistic brushstrokes on a canvas, new kinds of clothing fabrics, a unique design on a product, the recipe of a soda, cinema, music, patents to be used to make smartphone batteries smaller and last longer, new medicines and new medical technologies, ideas on how to more efficiently liquefy natural gas, and so forth. However, the elephant in the room that we must address is Chinese theft of American intellectual property within recent years. China's economic rise within in the past 4 decades is without precedent in human history, and the concern is that China will continue this pattern well into the future, and in the process, convert economic might into military might and overtake the United States as the world's #1 superpower. In order to achieve this, China must transform itself from a low value added export economy into the world's leader in innovation in terms of high tech manufacturing of advanced technologies such as information technology, 5G telecommunications, artificial intelligence, and so forth. When we remember that the government of China is an authoritarian regime, the only chance that the Chinese Communist Party has of holding on to power in the long term is to sustain high levels of economic growth. Such will guarantee that China will be willing to do whatever it takes to sustain high levels of economic growth, including the possibility of continuing to steal large levels of American intellectual property in order to reach its goal of becoming the world leader in high-tech manufacturing. The best way to protect American intellectual property is to present China with two options. One, work with the United States to create effective bilateral mechanisms to definitively end large-scale theft of American intellectual property and earn a partnership with the United States in order to sustain high levels of economic growth through increased economic interdependence with the United States. 2. Continue to steal U.S. intellectual property and be deprived of the benefits of partnering with the United States. Concerning option number 1, the United States could then use this economic interdependence with China to increase economic growth to a level where it could then receive relative power gains compared with China and not simply achieve absolute gains. That is, for the United States to use interdependence with China to increase its relative gains compared with China, structural factors and complex structural problems that might be leading the United States and China toward conflict could be alleviated. Thank you.